Welcome back to my channel. This is Dika from Dika's Adventures. I put out a video about 2 weeks ago with a controversial subject about eating largemouth bass. Now, I have discovered that there are way more people in the United States that eat largemouth bass than I ever would have expected. Now, this video was very successful, and I got a lot of feedback. I got a lot of feedback from social media, and I got a lot of feedback on the YouTube channel, and a lot of the comments have inspired me to make another video on kind of the same subject. So I'm going to move on with this, and I'm going to get right into it and see if we can spark another conversation. And I want lots of feedback. I want feedback whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me. But before I get into it, I want you to like, I want you to subscribe, I want you to hit that bell that's going to let you know of any new videos I have coming out. Now let's get into it. Itchy nose. Sorry. So I went out and I did a little research. I went and I spoke with educated people in this field. I spoke with some biologists, I spoke with some fish and wildlife folks, and I spoke with some conservationists. These were all face-to-face conversations, and I took notes, handwritten notes down. One of the conversations was via text message, so I'm not quoting any article that I read. This is all notes based on what I saw. Excuse me. Thirsty. All right, so the best place to start with this, I think, is something that's known in the bass fishing world as catch and release. In the kayak fishing world, it's called catch, photo, and release, CPR, with the tournament anglers, which kayak fishing is, it's blowing up all over the country right now, with KBF and Chad Hoover and Gene Jensen and all those people that are supporting that. So, catch and release. Should we do it? Should we do catch and release? Or should we take the fish? There's two sides to this coin. So catch and release can be good. What you have to do is you have to know your fishery. So one conservationist that I spoke with, he said that if you're, excuse me if I read a little bit because some of this information is new to me. So he said if your fishery, wherever you are, lake, pond, private pond, or wherever you are, you're catching all dinks. You're catching 12-inch bass all day long, but you can catch a ton of them. It's in your best interest to take some of those bass out. Now, you could eat them, he said, like, you could start with, if you feel uncomfortable just taking a healthy bass out, encourage your friends that fish the other place or people that you know, or you could even put up a sign if you wanted to. I'm not sure how popular you'd be, but every time you foul hook a bass or every time that you have to revive it a little bit, take that bass out. Unless it's a complete monster. But for the most part, we're talking about fisheries where you're catching 12-inch bass or lower. He suggested that you go down there and you fish your limit for a week, and encourage your friends and other people to do the same thing. Now, the reason being is that, well, before I get into it, he also mentioned that there's something else that you can do with these bass besides eating them if that's not your forte. He says that they're very good for the soil, especially for vegetable gardens. He says you can cut them up in pieces or grind them with a grinder, and you can put them in a compost pile, or you can put them right in with your vegetables, mix them in with the soil. The deteriorating or decomposing fish is really good for the soil. I didn't know that. Or if you have any fruit trees or even shrubbery, you can mix it in with the soil. He says sometimes you're going to get a stench for a week because it's decomposing fish, but it's really good for that too. So it's another way to help your fishery and take the bass out at the same time and not wasting it. All right. So they recommend that they talked about this thing called the capacity of your lake. Now, what happens is that you have so much food, you can only sustain so much food for so many fish or so much wildlife that is in there, or fish or bluegills or crawfish or whatever. So there's only so much food to sustain so much. And what it does is it reaches that limit with all these tiny little bass, and they can never get any bigger. Now, what he said, what happens in a lot of them is they're not completely nourished. They get enough to make it by, and they don't grow. But he said it's very similar to like if you keep domestic fish at home, you know, they're only going to grow as big as their tank. Now you could put one in there and it's going to get huge, but if you put 5 in there, they're all going to get the same size. He says it's the same thing. You can't sustain the food when it gets to this point. So he suggests that you take them out. He used a word called carrying capacity, but he says it's just a term, and what it is, it's just there's too many fish. There's too many fish, and if you take them out, then it's going to leave room for food for some fish to get bigger, you know. But you have to continue to do it and sort of actively be part of making your fishery better. All right. I could do a video just on this, but there's a bunch of things I want to touch on. And like I said, put things in the comments. I want to know what you think. I'm not an expert. I'm kind of quoting people that I spoke to. So I have some other things that I have here. And one of the other subjects was a lot of people said that bass, largemouth bass, are not safe to eat. Now, I spoke with 2 biologists and 3 wildlife fishery people, and they said that is not true. That is not true 100%. Now, this isn't me saying it. This is them. They said there are no restrictions on eating largemouth bass. There's no outstanding restrictions. A lot of people in my comments, they mentioned mercury levels. All fish have mercury, different levels. Largemouth bass do have higher amounts of mercury than some fish, but salmon, I guess, also has very, very high mercury levels also. Ideally, they said you don't want to make that like your primary food source. You know, like I hunt and I eat venison, and venison is really, really high in uric acid, and it causes gout in a lot of people. But I eat a lot of venison, but I don't make it my primary food source. So they talked about that, and they said the only restriction with largemouth bass that they are aware of is not eating it raw, because it's a cold-blooded fish, and it's relatively in warm water. There's a lot of pathogens and things that could really make us ill if we ate it raw, that they all get sort of killed off in the cooking process. All right, what else do I have here? So they talked about carrying capacity and taking fish out, and they said that it's safe to eat. A lot of people don't find it good, you know, because it starts off kind of flaky when you cook it, and then it can be like a mushy, fishy taste. But some people find it very palatable, and that's what they're used to, and it is nutritious. It's a nutritious fish. They believe, the people that I spoke with, they're granted they're from my area, and I'm from Massachusetts, and they don't. Not a lot of people in Massachusetts keep and eat largemouth bass, but they said there's a lot of other species of fish out there that are more palatable and ultimately taste better. So another thing that they talked about is, and I don't necessarily buy it, but I want you to tell me what you think. Another good reason for removing small bass from fisheries that mostly have small bass, and it's also good to remove small bass from fisheries even if there are other big fish, especially if you do think it's overpopulated. And they said people can do that at your discretion, because it's not illegal to take bass out and eat them, or catch a limit and bring it home. Is that smaller bass eat the fry. They eat the eggs or the fry, the small bass that are born, and only 10% of the eggs that hatch actually make it to be bass, and then another 5% of them never make it past like the first 4 months because they get eaten. So they said a lot of small bass eat the fry, but I mean, based on what I know as a fisherman when I've fished during the spawn, is that a lot of bluegill eat those spawn. Those bluegills are just chomping up eggs all the time. I mean, the larger bass or the bass guarding the beds, they're always chasing bluegills. And I know that bluegill baits are great for pulling the bass off the beds. I suppose it makes sense. You let me know what you think. I'm not really sure. But I don't know, it makes sense. So anyway, that's the end of my video. I want you to let me know what you think. I want you to subscribe, hit that like button, and let me know. Put something in the comments, and maybe I can pull another video out of this. I don't know how much more content I can do, but I think I'd like to do one on just catch and release. All right, be well.